The boy from the landfill dawn arrived slowly in Riverside, painting the piles of garbage that accumulated in the forgotten lot behind the old industrial warehouse with yellowish tones. It was here, among the city's waste and discards, that Tyler, known to everyone as Ty, only 11 years old, built his small empire of survival. Skinny, with skin bronzed by the constant sun and ever-alert brown eyes, the boy knew every inch of that place like the lines on his own palm. Ty had been up since 5 in the morning. That's when the first trucks arrived, bringing what for many was trash, but for him meant potential income. Plastic bottles, aluminum cans, clean cardboard, everything had value to those who knew where to sell. And Ty knew. At 11 years old, he already negotiated like an adult. "Good morning, Ty." The hoarse voice of old Pete, one of the oldest scavengers at the dump, traveled across the distance. The old man was pushing his cart already full, despite the day just beginning. "You're up early today, huh, kid?" "Every day, old Pete. First one here gets the best stuff," replied the boy, without stopping his search through a newly arrived pile. The landfill was a world apart. It had its own rules, hierarchies, and value systems. There, Ty wasn't just a boy. He was a trader respected by adults. Orphaned since the age of 6, he had been raised by his grandmother Nellie until she became seriously ill 2 years ago. Now he lived with a distant uncle who barely noticed his existence. The landfill was his true home, his school, his playground, and his livelihood. On that specific October morning, the air was heavier than usual. A light rain had fallen during the night, making everything more difficult to handle and sort. Ty worked quickly, checking torn bags, soaked boxes, objects carelessly discarded. His nimble fingers recognized value by touch, without needing to look too closely. That's when he noticed something strange. Between 2 large bags of industrial waste, there was a shape that didn't seem to belong. It was larger, denser. He approached cautiously, always suspicious, as his hard life had taught him. He pushed aside some packaging with his foot and felt a shiver run down his spine. It was a man, lying on his side, partially covered by a dirty blue tarp. For a moment, Ty thought about running away and calling someone, but he quickly composed himself. At the landfill, problems rarely meant opportunities, and drawing attention was almost never a good idea. He moved closer, holding a long wooden stick. With it, he gently poked the motionless body. To his relief, the man moved slightly. He was alive, just unconscious. He was breathing with difficulty, but breathing. "Hey, mister," he called softly, not really expecting an answer. Silence was his only response. Ty crouched down, studying that strange figure. He wasn't an ordinary homeless person. The shoes, although dirty and damaged, were too expensive. The torn suit jacket indicated a different type of person, someone who didn't belong in that place. "I'll help you, if you pay me," Ty muttered, more to himself than to the unconscious man. It wasn't cruelty. It was survival. In his world, nothing was free, not even compassion. Every favor had a price, every help required something in return. That's how it worked. Carefully, he pulled the tarp that partially covered the man's face. He was young, maybe 35, with features that suggested education and money. His face was scratched, a cut on his right eyebrow, and purple bruises spread across his neck. Someone had done this to him, Ty thought, and whoever it was might still be looking. Ty quickly searched the man's pockets. He found a cell phone with a cracked screen turned off, a gold credit card dirty with mud, no documents, no identification. He kept both items in the torn pocket of his own shorts. For a moment, he considered leaving the man right there. It wasn't his problem. He had work to do, material to collect. But there was something about that fallen figure that sparked more than curiosity in Ty. Perhaps it was the stark contrast between the expensive shoes and the injured face, or the sense that there was a complex story here, a rare opportunity. Ty lived on opportunities, and this one seemed too big to ignore. He looked around, making sure no one was watching. Then, with surprising effort for his size, he began to drag the man away. There was a small improvised structure that Ty sometimes used for shelter when the rain was too heavy to go home. Made of leftover wood, tarps, and pieces of zinc, it was his secret refuge within the landfill itself. It was a difficult journey. The man was heavy and the terrain uneven. Twice Ty had to stop to catch his breath, but eventually he managed to bring the stranger to the shelter. "You're gonna owe me, fancy man," he said to the unconscious man, while arranging some old but clean rags under his head. Ty knew he needed to get back to work. He couldn't afford to lose an entire day of collecting, but he also couldn't simply abandon the man there. He decided he would return to check on him during the day. He left a half-empty water bottle within reach, in case he woke up. Before leaving, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. On the man's right hand, semi-concealed by the torn sleeve of his jacket, there was a ring. It didn't seem to be a common wedding band, but something more elaborate, a class ring perhaps, or from some institution. It was dirty but still gleamed when the weak morning light touched it. Ty hesitated. That was worth money, no doubt. He could take it and sell it easily. No one would know. The man probably wouldn't even remember where or how he had lost the ring. But something stopped him. It wasn't exactly conscience or kindness, it was instinct. That ring could be important. A clue about who the man was, and knowledge in Ty's world was worth more than quick money. "I'll be back later," he murmured to the stranger, adjusting the tarp to cover him better. "Don't die until then." He left the shelter and returned to his usual work, although his thoughts remained with the strange visitor. As he sorted materials and filled his own cart, Ty developed theories. Who was this man? How had he ended up in the landfill? Who had hurt him that way? And more importantly, how much would he be willing to pay for the help of an 11-year-old boy? The sun rose in the sky, warming the day and Ty's mood. Maybe, he thought as he worked, this was his lucky day. Maybe this strange man with expensive shoes was his ticket to something better. Or maybe he was just trouble. Either way, he was involved now. The morning advanced slowly. 3 times Ty returned to the shelter to check on the man. On the 3rd visit, he noticed that he was moving more, seemed restless even while unconscious. He murmured disconnected words, names that didn't make sense. His face was hot, probably with fever. Ty knew he needed help. He couldn't take care of a sick adult alone, but he also couldn't trust just anyone. Most people at the landfill had their own problems to solve, and calling an ambulance would mean questions, maybe even the police. Ty avoided authorities on principle. There was only one person he trusted enough. Mrs. Jenkins, a woman who lived nearby and sometimes gave Ty food when the day had been especially difficult. She had been a nurse many years ago, before life took unexpected turns. If anyone could help without asking too many questions, it would be her. Decided, Ty finished his workday early. He sold what he had collected for a lower price than usual, just to have some money in his pocket. He bought bread, milk, and fever medicine at Mr. Newton's small store. Then he headed to Mrs. Jenkins' simple house, at the end of the dirt road that bordered the landfill. As he walked, he felt the weight of the cell phone and card in his pocket. He also felt the weight of the decision he had made. Helping this man could mean trouble, but Ty always knew that opportunities and risks walked together. The sun was beginning to set when he knocked on Mrs. Jenkins' door. The day had been long, and something told him the night would be even longer. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. Mrs. Jenkins opened the door with a worried expression. At 68, she maintained the upright posture and sharp gaze of someone who had spent her life caring for people. She immediately recognized the expression on Ty's face. It was the same one she had seen on so many faces when she worked in the emergency room of the county hospital years ago. It was the look of someone who needed help, but didn't know how to ask. "What is it, child? Has something happened?" she asked, drying her hands on her worn apron. Ty hesitated. He trusted Mrs. Jenkins more than any adult, but still, revealing the man meant sharing something that could be valuable. On the other hand, he needed her. "I need your help, Mrs. Jenkins. There's an injured man in my shelter. I think he has a fever." The woman's expression changed from concern to alarm. "A man? What man, Ty? Why didn't you call an ambulance?" "I can't. He doesn't seem to be from around here. He's in a suit, all scratched up. I think someone beat him up and dumped him at the landfill." Mrs. Jenkins frowned. She knew well enough how things worked to understand the boy's hesitation. "And you took him to your shelter? Why?" Ty looked away, kicking an imaginary pebble on the cement floor. "I thought he might pay me later. He looks rich." The woman sighed deeply. She had known Ty since he was little, when he still accompanied his grandmother on collections, a boy too smart for his own good, who had learned too early that kindness rarely filled empty stomachs. "Get my things," she said, pointing to an old cabinet in the living room. "That brown bag, and wait for me here while I change." 15 minutes later, they walked together toward the landfill. The sky was already darkening, and the weak lights of the street lamps were beginning to light up along the potholed street. Mrs. Jenkins carried her nurse's bag, full of basic supplies she had kept since retiring. Ty led the way, with the familiarity of someone who knows every stone and hole. "Did he say anything? Tell you who he was?" asked Mrs. Jenkins as she avoided a puddle of water. "Nothing that made sense. Just muttered some names. Said something about a company, about numbers. I didn't really understand." They arrived at Ty's improvised shelter when night had completely fallen. The boy moved aside the tarp that served as a door and made way for Mrs. Jenkins. Inside, in the weak light of an improvised lamp made with oil and a wick, the unknown man remained motionless, but his breathing seemed more regular. Mrs. Jenkins approached with the caution of years of experience. She checked his vital signs, examined the visible wounds, cleaned his dirty face with water and cotton she had brought. She worked in silence for almost half an hour, while Ty watched, sitting on a wooden crate in the corner of the shelter. "He has a nasty cut on his head, but it's not as bad as it looks," she finally said. "He's dehydrated and has a low fever. He appears to have been assaulted, but I didn't see signs of broken bones. The most concerning thing is that lump on his head. It may have caused a concussion." "What's a concussion?" asked Ty, leaning in to see better. "It's when the brain hits against the skull with force. It can cause confusion, memory loss, dizziness. He needs hydration, rest, and ideally a hospital." Ty shook his head negatively. "No hospital. If someone did this to him, they'll look there first." Mrs. Jenkins studied the boy with a penetrating look. "You don't know who he is. You don't know what happened, but you've already decided he's being pursued. Ty, this is dangerous. If this man is involved in something serious—" "It's not our business," interrupted the boy. "I just want to help him get better, find out who he is, and maybe he'll be grateful." The woman sighed again, recognizing the determination in the young face. "I'll leave some medications. You need to give him water regularly, even if he's unconscious. Moisten his lips, tilt his head so he swallows a little, and if the fever increases or he starts having seizures, you call me immediately, no matter what time. Understood?" Ty nodded seriously. Mrs. Jenkins handed him a small bottle of fever pills, some clean bandages, and a bottle of mineral water she had brought. "I'll come back tomorrow to check on him again. Be careful, Ty. Don't tell anyone about him yet." After she left, Ty sat down next to the unknown man. In the flickering light of the lamp, he studied his face. He had fine features, several days' stubble, dark hair that was beginning to grey at the temples. He didn't look very old, perhaps the age of some teachers Ty had known when he still attended school. "Who are you?" he murmured, more to himself than to the man. Following Mrs. Jenkins' instructions, he moistened the stranger's lips with water, gently raising his head. To his surprise, the man swallowed reflexively, and his eyes trembled under closed eyelids. My Michael," murmured the man, almost inaudibly. Ty moved closer. "Michael, is that your name? Michael?" But the man had already returned to unconsciousness. Ty repeated the name a few times, testing how it sounded. Michael. It seemed too common a name for someone with such expensive shoes. He took the cell phone from his pocket. It was damaged, the screen cracked down the middle with no sign of life. He tried to turn it on, pressed several buttons, but nothing happened. The battery was probably discharged, or the device had broken in the fall, or whatever accident had brought Michael here. He checked the credit card again. It was a black card, with golden embossed letters. A. Matthews. Not Michael, then. A. Matthews. Anthony, Alexander, Andrew, he sighed, putting the card away again. Tomorrow would be another workday. He couldn't afford to waste time with mysteries when there was material to collect and sell. But before lying down in the other corner of the shelter, on wooden pallets covered with a thin mattress, he looked once more at the ring on the man's hand. In the lamplight he could better distinguish the design. It wasn't a class ring as he had initially thought. It had a symbol in the center, something like a crest or logo. He decided he would examine it better in daylight. The night passed slowly. 3 times Ty woke up to check on the man and offer him water. The 3rd time, shortly before dawn, he noticed that the fever had increased. Michael's or A. Matthews's face was red, his body trembling slightly. "Damn," muttered Ty, remembering Mrs. Jenkins's instructions. He gave the man another fever pill, dissolving it in water and making him swallow small sips. It was all he could do until the woman returned later. When the sun began to rise on the horizon, Ty went out for his usual work. He couldn't waste a day of collecting, especially now that he had an extra mouth to feed. Before leaving, he carefully covered the man and left water within reach in case he woke up. The day went on like any other at the landfill. Ty sorted materials, negotiated with buyers, avoided conflicts with other scavengers over territory. But his mind was distant, divided between routine and the mystery he had found among trash bags. Around noon, when the sun was strongest and most scavengers sought shade to rest and eat, Ty decided to return to the shelter to check on his guest. As he approached, he noticed something different. The tarp that served as a door was slightly open in a way he hadn't left it. He approached cautiously, firmly holding a piece of pipe he used as a tool. He slowly moved the tarp aside, prepared for whatever he might find. The man was sitting up. He still looked weak, disoriented, but he was conscious. He was looking around with a confused expression, his eyes half closed against the brightness that entered through the cracks of the improvised shelter. "You're awake," said Ty, unable to hide the surprise in his voice. The man turned slowly toward him. His eyes, Ty noticed, were an intense brown, almost golden, the kind of look that seemed to see through people. Where am I?" he asked, his voice hoarse and low, as if it hadn't been used for days. "In my shelter, at the Riverside landfill. I found you thrown among the trash bags, all beat up." The man blinked a few times as if processing the information. He brought his hand to his head, touching the improvised bandage that Mrs. Jenkins had made. "How long?" 3 days, answered Ty, moving closer, but still keeping his distance. "You were in bad shape, feverish, talking nonsense." The man looked at his own clothes, the torn and dirty suit, the ruined shoes. His eyes reflected genuine confusion. I can't remember," he murmured, more to himself than to Ty. "Why am I here? Who would—" Ty interrupted his ramblings. "Are you Michael, or A. Matthews?" The man looked at the boy with surprise. "How do you know? You muttered Michael yesterday, and your card has A. Matthews written on it." "My card? You found it in your pocket," said Ty, showing no remorse. "Along with a broken cell phone. I was looking to see if you had any ID, needed to know who you were." The man seemed to want to protest, but then his face contorted in an expression of pain. He brought his hands to his temples, closing his eyes tightly. "My head, it hurts so much." Ty moved closer and offered the water bottle. "Drink. Mrs. Jenkins said you're dehydrated. She's coming later to check on you again." "Mrs. Jenkins?" "A lady who lives nearby. Former nurse. She's the one who took care of your wounds." The man accepted the water with trembling hands. He drank slowly, as if each sip required effort. When he finished, he looked at Ty with more attention. "You brought me here? Helped me? Why?" Ty shrugged, looking away. "Thought it might be worth something. You look like someone with money." Instead of being offended, the man let out a weak, almost painful laugh. "Straight to the point. What's your name, kid?" "Tyler, but everyone calls me Ty." "Thank you, Ty. The man hesitated, his expression changing to confusion again. "I can't quite remember who I am. I have flashes, loose images. I remember an office, people arguing. But it's like it's someone else's life." Ty studied the man with renewed interest. Amnesia. It was like in the movies he sometimes watched on Mrs. Jenkins' small TV. People who lost their memory after accidents. They were usually important people, rich, with secrets. "Do you remember your full name, where you live, family?" The man closed his eyes, concentrating. Anthony Matthews. That I know. I work at a company. Big. Technology. Innovation." He opened his eyes, frustrated, but the rest is blurry, like there's a fog between me and my memories. Well, Anthony Matthews, you're going to stay here until you get better. Mrs. Jenkins is coming later. She'll help. I have to get back to work now. Ty headed for the exit, but stopped when Anthony called his name. He turned, meeting those golden eyes fixed on his. You saved my life, Ty. I won't forget that. When I fully recover my memory, I'll repay you. Promise. The boy nodded, showing no emotion. He had heard promises before. Most of the time, they weren't worth the air used to pronounce them, but something in Anthony's voice sounded different. There was firmness, even amid the confusion and pain. Rest. I'll be back in the evening with food. Leaving the shelter, Ty allowed himself a small smile. Perhaps, just perhaps, his bet was starting to pay off. The following days established a peculiar routine. Ty left early in the morning for his work at the landfill, returned at noon with some food, and at night brought more food and water. Mrs. Jenkins visited the shelter regularly, bringing basic medications and monitoring Anthony's recovery. Gradually, the man gained strength, although his memories remained fragmented like pieces of an incomplete puzzle. A week after their meeting, on a stuffy October afternoon, Anthony finally managed to leave the shelter supported by Ty. They took a few steps through the uneven terrain of the landfill, carefully avoiding areas where other scavengers might see them. Anthony was still weak, but his mind seemed clearer, more present. Something happened at the company, he commented, while resting sitting on a pile of old tires in the shade of a solitary tree. I remember a meeting, raised voices, someone saying I was wrong, that I should reconsider. Reconsider what? Asked Ty, who was chewing a piece of bread while listening. I'm not entirely sure. I have flashes of documents, numbers, graphs, something related to a big project, something revolutionary. Anthony furrowed his brow, making an effort. Biofuel. Yes, something about a new biofuel formula. Ty looked at him with renewed curiosity. Like gasoline? You invented gasoline? Anthony smiled, the first genuine smile since he'd woken up. Not exactly, but something similar. A cleaner, more efficient alternative. I remember working on it for years. It is my life's project. And then, what happened? Someone wanted to steal. Anthony closed his eyes, concentrating. No, that's not quite it. Someone wanted to take control, change the direction, use it for another purpose. Ty shrugged. I don't understand these company things. I just know that the more important something is, the more people want to take it for themselves. Anthony looked at the boy with admiration. You're quite wise for your age, Ty. Yes, that's exactly it. My project. Our team developed something that could change the country's energy future. Reduce dependence on oil, decrease pollution, but there's a lot of money involved. And when there's money, kudasa, people will do anything, completed Ty, with the naturalness of someone who knew the subject well. They sat in silence for a few moments, each lost in their own thoughts. In the distance, the sound of garbage trucks and the voices of scavengers created an urban symphony, familiar to Ty, strange to Anthony. That ring, said Ty finally, the one you have on your hand, what does it mean? Anthony looked at his own right hand as if noticing the ring for the first time. He examined it carefully, turning it on his finger. It's the company symbol, MatTech Innovations. My father founded the company 30 years ago. I started as an intern, then worked my way up. For the last 5 years, I've led the research and development department. That's when we started Project Helios. Helios, the name of the biofuel project. In Greek mythology, Helios was the god of the sun. Our fuel would be derived primarily from solar energy, combined with organic compounds. Ty nodded, though he didn't fully understand the concept. What mattered to him was that Anthony seemed to be someone really important, someone who, once recovered, could generously reward those who had helped him. And why would someone dump you in a landfill? Ty's direct question made Anthony shudder. It was the question that had been tormenting him since he regained consciousness. I had a presentation, the final project. After years of research, we had succeeded. The formula was ready, tested, proven. I was going to present it to the board of directors for final approval before patent registration. And then, Richard Morgan. The name came out like a hiss between Anthony's teeth. My deputy director. We worked together for years. He wanted to sell the technology. Not launch it commercially as planned, but sell the complete package to an oil multinational. That would shelve it so no one could use it, deduced Ty. Anthony looked at the boy with surprise. Exactly. How do you know that? Watched a lot of movies on Mrs. Jenkins' TV, replied Ty with a shrug. There's always that kind of thing. Rich people buying good inventions so no one can use them because they make more money with the bad stuff. A pretty accurate summary, murmured Anthony. We had a fierce argument before the presentation. He insisted that I consider the proposal, said there was a lot at stake, that it was a deal worth hundreds of millions, but I refused. Anthony paused, his forehead wrinkled with effort. After that, everything's blurry. I remember being in the parking lot, someone approaching, a blow, and then nothing until I woke up here. Ty chewed the last piece of bread, thoughtful. So this Richard probably ordered someone to scare you. Or worse. Anthony nodded slowly. It's the only logical explanation. Him or someone at his command. What I don't understand is why leave me alive. If the intention was to prevent me from making the presentation, maybe they didn't want to kill you, suggested Ty. Just scare you, or keep you away for a while, or maybe they thought you wouldn't survive in the landfill. I wouldn't have survived without you, acknowledged Anthony, looking with sincere gratitude at the boy. Ty looked away, uncomfortable with the thanks. So, what's the plan? Are you going back to your company to report this, Richard? It's not that simple. If my suspicions are correct, Richard isn't alone in this. He must have support from part of the board. They're powerful people with connections. I can't just show up and make accusations without proof. And the proof of your fuel? Don't you have that stored somewhere? I have backup copies. One on my personal computer at home, another on a private server, and a third. Anthony instinctively touched the ring. A third one here. Ty's eyes widened. In the ring, it's a disguised storage device, proprietary technology from MatTech. It looks like an ordinary ring, but it contains a tiny memory chip. I used it to store the most important project files. The boy whistled, impressed. Like a secret flash drive? Cool? More or less that, smiled Anthony. But I need a computer to access the data, and I also need to find out what happened at the company since my disappearance. How long has it been since you disappeared? Considering I was unconscious for 3 days, and then another week recovering. It must be about 10 days now. Ty reflected for a moment. Mrs. Jenkins has an old computer. Her grandson left it there when he moved abroad. She doesn't use it much, but it works. Has internet and everything. That would be perfect. I could check news, maybe even access my emails, see what's going on. I'll talk to her tonight. Bet she'll let you use it. The rest of the afternoon passed with Ty showing Anthony less visible parts of the landfill, places where he could walk to regain his strength without being noticed. Anthony observed everything with a mixture of fascination and discomfort, seeing for the first time a world that existed right next to his own, but that he had never really seen. As night fell, as promised, Ty took Anthony to Mrs. Jenkins' house. The journey was slow and cautious, using less busy alleys. Anthony wore borrowed clothes, a faded t-shirt and loose pants that belonged to Mrs. Jenkins' late husband. They didn't suit him, but they were infinitely better than the torn and dirty suit. Mrs. Jenkins received them with her usual look of concern and assessment. She already knew Anthony from her visits to the shelter to care for his wounds, but it was the first time she received him in her home. "You look better, sir," she commented as she invited them in, "but you still need proper rest and better food than what Ty can bring." "You've already done more than I could ask for," Anthony responded politely. "I'm extremely grateful for your care." Mrs. Jenkins' house was simple, but impeccably clean and organized. Old furniture, well-preserved family photos in frames on a shelf, a completely different world from the landfill, although only a few blocks away. "Ty told me about your situation," she said, putting a kettle on the stove, "or at least what you two have managed to piece together from your memories." "Everything's still confusing," admitted Anthony, "but I'm remembering more and more, and I need to act soon. If what I suspect is happening, years of work could be at risk. And do you think it's prudent to expose yourself like this? If someone really tried to harm you, they might try again. That's why I need information first, to find out what happened at the company during my absence." Ty mentioned that you have a computer. Mrs. Jenkins looked at Ty with an expression half reproving, half amused. I see the boy has already offered my resources without consulting. Sorry, Mrs. Jenkins, muttered Ty, not really looking sorry. But it's important, and Mr. Anthony will pay for using it, right? He added, looking significantly at the man. Anthony nodded quickly. Certainly. As soon as I resolve this situation, I'll adequately compensate all the help I'm receiving. The woman made a dismissive gesture with her hand. I don't care about payment. I just want to make sure we're not getting involved in something dangerous. I'll do my best to keep you out of this, assured Anthony. I just need internet access to check a few things. After serving tea and a bowl of soup to Anthony, Mrs. Jenkins led them to a small room at the back of the house. There, on a simple desk, was a somewhat outdated but functional desktop computer. My grandson used it for his studies, left it here when he got a scholarship to Boston. I turn it on occasionally to see family photos on Facebook, but I don't understand much about these gadgets. Anthony sat down at the computer, turning it on with evident anxiety. While the operating system loaded slowly, Ty and Mrs. Jenkins watched, each with their own expectations and apprehensions. The first website Anthony accessed was that of his own company, Matech Innovations. The homepage displayed a photo of the headquarters building in downtown Chicago, modern and imposing. Anthony navigated quickly until he reached the team section. His face turned pale. "What is it?" asked Ty, moving closer. "My name, it's not here anymore." Anthony pointed to the screen where the company's organizational chart showed Richard Morgan as Director of Research and Development. "I've been erased." With trembling fingers, Anthony opened a new tab and searched for Anthony Matthews Matech on news sites. The first result made his heart race. "Matech executive suffers nervous breakdown and is removed," he read aloud. The news, published on the business blog of a major newspaper, was brief and vague. It mentioned that Anthony Matthews, after erratic behavior during an important meeting, had been put on indefinite leave for medical treatment. Richard Morgan would temporarily assume his duties. "Sons of bitches," muttered Anthony, his face contorted in a mixture of anger and disbelief. "They planned everything. They attacked me, discarded me in the trash, and now they're telling a completely fabricated story." "And your family?" asked Mrs. Jenkins, concerned. "Isn't there anyone looking for you?" Anthony closed his eyes for a moment. "I've been divorced for 3 years. My ex-wife lives in Boston with our son. We talk little. My parents are deceased. I have a sister in Europe." His voice faltered. "They probably told them the same story, that I had a breakdown, that I'm in some clinic." "And your project?" asked Ty, pointing to the screen. "Is there anything about that there?" Anthony went back to searching, this time with more focus. He found a business note from 2 days before. "Matech announces strategic partnership with Global Petrol for development of new energy technologies." "Global Petrol," muttered Anthony, clenching his fists. "One of the largest oil companies in the world. Exactly as I suspected. They're selling Project Helios." "Is there still time to stop it?" asked Ty. "Maybe. These negotiations usually take weeks, sometimes months, especially with complex technology like Helios." Anthony took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. "I need access to my files. I need to prove that the technology is mine, that I was the one who developed the central core of the research." "And how are you going to do that?" Anthony twisted the ring on his finger. "With this, and with help." "My help?" asked Ty, his eyes shining in anticipation. "Yours and that of trusted people. I can't simply show up at the company. I'd be detained at the entrance or worse. I need a strategy." Mrs. Jenkins, who had been watching the scene with growing concern, interrupted. "Gentlemen, I think this conversation can continue tomorrow. It's late, and you both need rest." Anthony looked at the clock on the computer screen and nodded. "You're right. Sorry to abuse your hospitality until this hour." "You can stay here tonight," offered Mrs. Jenkins. "I have a simple guest room, but certainly more comfortable than Ty's shelter." The boy looked slightly offended, but didn't protest. He knew it was true. "I'm immensely grateful," replied Anthony, "and I promise it won't be for long. Tomorrow we'll start to act." While Mrs. Jenkins prepared the room, Anthony gently held Ty's arm. "Thank you," he said with sincerity. "Without you, I would be dead, and I would never know what happened to my work, to my life." Ty looked away, uncomfortable. "I just did what anyone would do." "No, you didn't. You did much more, and when this is all over, I'll make sure you have a better life. That's a promise. The boy nodded without showing whether he believed it or not. He had heard many promises in his life, but as he said goodbye and walked back to his shelter in the landfill, he couldn't help feeling a twinge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. The next morning brought with it a fine, persistent rain that transformed the landfill into a difficult-to-navigate, muddy mess. Ty woke up earlier than usual, anxious about the next steps in the plan that was beginning to form. He put on his thin jacket, already patched in various places, and headed to Mrs. Jenkins' house even before the sun had fully risen. He found Anthony already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee in his hands. He looked different. The rest in a decent bed, the adequate food, and mainly the clarity about his situation had brought back something of his old posture. Even wearing borrowed and simple clothes, he emanated an aura of natural authority. "Good morning," greeted Ty, accepting the bread with butter that Mrs. Jenkins offered him. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than in the last few days, for sure," replied Anthony with a discreet smile, "and I already have some ideas about how to proceed." Mrs. Jenkins placed a cup of coffee with milk in front of Ty and sat down with them. "Do you plan to go to the police, sir? Report what happened?" Anthony shook his head negatively. "Not yet. Without concrete evidence, it would be my word against Richard's and the board's. They would say I had a nervous breakdown, that I'm confused, paranoid. We need solid evidence first." "And how are we going to get that?" asked Ty, between bites of bread. "I need to contact someone from the company I trust, someone who can help me better understand what's happening internally and maybe even gain access to the systems." "Do you have someone like that in mind?" inquired Mrs. Jenkins. "Yes, Claire Roberts, my executive assistant. We've worked together for 6 years. If there's anyone loyal at MatTech, it's her." Ty frowned. "How are we going to find this Claire? We can't just show up at the company." "We don't need to. I have her personal number." Anthony hesitated, looking at the broken cell phone that Ty had found with him. "But we need a working phone." "You can use mine," offered Mrs. Jenkins, taking a simple device from her purse. "It's not one of those modern ones, but it makes calls normally." Anthony thanked her, but seemed hesitant. "The problem is that I can't simply call. If Richard is monitoring her communications, or if she's under some kind of surveillance, then send a message," suggested Ty pragmatically. "Tell her to meet us somewhere, away from the company." "Not a bad idea," agreed Anthony, thoughtful, "but it needs to be a place where she feels safe to go, and at the same time where we won't be easily recognized." "There's a small park near the mall downtown," suggested Mrs. Jenkins. "There's always people, but it's not too busy. My niece works at the department store nearby." Anthony nodded slowly. "It might work. I'll send a coded message, something only she would understand." He took the borrowed phone and typed carefully. After a few minutes of consideration, he sent, "Claire, I need you to review that Icarus project report we discussed at Teresa's birthday. Today, 3 p.m., Washington Park, bench under the maple tree. Urgent. A.M." "Icarus?" asked Ty, curious. "A code between us. It's what we called Project Helios before the official name, and Teresa is my goddaughter, her daughter. Claire will know it's me." The three spent the following hours developing plans. Anthony explained more details about Project Helios, revolutionary technology that would allow converting agricultural waste into biofuel with much higher efficiency than existing methods. The differential, he explained, was in a special catalyst developed after years of research, which accelerated the process and drastically reduced costs. "That's why Global Petrol is interested," he explained. "Not to use the technology, but to bury it. A clean, renewable, and cheap fuel would directly threaten their oil profits." Ty listened to everything with attention, fascinated by this world so distant from his own. He didn't completely understand the technical terms, but he understood the essentials. Anthony had created something important, something that could help many people, and powerful people wanted to prevent it from reaching the public. At 2 p.m., the three left for downtown. Anthony, still wary of being recognized, wore an old cap of Mrs. Jenkins and sunglasses. It wasn't a sophisticated disguise, but it could fool casual glances. They took a crowded bus, an experience that Anthony clearly wasn't used to, but endured without complaints. Washington Park was relatively quiet when they arrived. Some elderly people played checkers at the concrete tables, Mothers watched children playing in the small playground. Street vendors offered water and popcorn. They located the bench under the maple tree mentioned in the message and sat down to wait. "What's this Claire like?" asked Ty, swinging his legs that barely touched the ground. "Intelligent, efficient, loyal?" Anthony smiled slightly. "She's about 35, short hair dyed red, usually wears thick-framed glasses. She's the type of person who always knows everything that happens in the company, even before the directors." "Do you think she'll believe your story?" "I hope so. Claire and I have been through a lot together in the last few years. She knows Richard as well as I do. She knows what he's capable of." Precisely at 3 p.m., a woman who matched the description entered the park. She walked with quick, decisive steps, looking discreetly around. She wore dark pants and a simple blue blouse, different from the corporate clothes she would normally wear. Her eyes, behind black-framed glasses, examined each person in the park with meticulous attention. When she spotted the trio on the bench, she hesitated briefly. Anthony stood up, removing his sunglasses so she could recognize him with certainty. Claire's face transformed into an expression of absolute shock, quickly followed by relief and joy. She approached, almost running. "My God, Anthony! It's really you!" She hugged him tightly, to Ty's surprise, who had never imagined his guest being embraced with such affection. When she moved away, Claire's eyes were teary. "We were so worried. They said you had a breakdown, that you were hospitalized in a private clinic, but no one would say which one. No one gave details. I tried all the contacts I had, but—" "Let's sit down," Anthony gently interrupted. "I have a lot to explain, and I need your help." During the next 30 minutes, Anthony related everything he remembered and what he had discovered. How he had been attacked in the parking lot, how he had woken up in the landfill, how Ty had found him and helped him. Claire listened to everything with growing indignation, occasionally asking questions to clarify details. "I knew something was wrong," she said when Anthony finished. "The day after your supposed breakdown, Richard showed up with all the access to your files, claiming you had authorized it. The story didn't make sense, but no one questioned it. And then, 3 days later, they announced this partnership with Global Petrol." "How much do they know about the project?" asked Anthony, tense. "Not everything. Your main files were protected, but Richard has been pressuring the development team to reconstruct parts of the Catalyst algorithm, so far without much success." "And when does the official transfer happen?" "The contract signing with Global Petrol." Claire adjusted her glasses, a gesture that Ty noticed was habitual when she was thinking. "The signing ceremony is scheduled for 3 days from now. Big event in the main auditorium of the headquarters, with press and everything. They're treating it like a historic milestone for the company." Anthony clenched his fists. 3 days. It's not much time, but it might be enough." "Enough for what exactly?" asked Claire. "To gather evidence and prevent the sale." Anthony twisted the ring on his finger. "I have the original project files here. I need to access them and then find a way to make everything public before the contract is signed." Claire looked at the ring with surprise. "The quantum storage? I thought it was just a prototype." "It worked perfectly, but I need access to a secure computer to extract the data." "I can help with that," offered Claire. "My brother works with digital security. He has a complete setup at home, isolated from external networks." Ty, who had remained silent for most of the conversation, finally spoke. "And then what? How are we going to stop the ceremony?" The 3 adults looked at the boy with varied expressions. Claire with surprise at the "we," Mrs. Jenkins with concern, and Anthony with something close to admiration. "We need the press," replied Anthony after a moment. "Someone who can publish the complete story, with evidence. Someone who isn't afraid to confront powerful corporations." "I know the perfect person," said Claire without hesitation. "Patricia Norton from the Herald. She's already covered various corporate scandals. She's incorruptible and brave." "Can you arrange a meeting with her?" "I can try, but Anthony—" Claire hesitated. "You need to understand that this is dangerous. Richard has powerful connections. When he realizes you're alive and have evidence against him—" "They've already tried to get rid of me once," replied Anthony, with a firmness that impressed Ty. "I won't let it happen again, and I won't allow them to destroy my work." Claire nodded, recognizing the determination in his voice. "I'll contact Patricia today, and my brother, about the computer. There's one more thing," added Anthony. I need to know exactly what they're saying about me at the company. Who's supporting Richard, who seems suspicious? Any information could be useful. I'll do a complete survey. Most of the technical team is confused. They accepted the nervous breakdown story, but they miss you. Some directors, especially Carter and Mitchell, seem very comfortable with Richard in charge. Doesn't surprise me. They were always the most conservative on the board. Claire looked at her watch. I need to get back. My prolonged absence could raise suspicions. Where can I find you later? Mrs. Jenkins, who had remained attentive but silent, finally spoke. My house is at your disposal. It's not big, but it's safe. Thank you, Ma'am. Jenkins. You can call me Mrs. Jenkins, like everyone else. Claire smiled, grateful. Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. I'll be in touch as soon as I have news, probably tonight. She turned to Anthony. Keep an eye on her phone. Before leaving, Claire hugged Anthony again, more briefly this time. I'm so happy you're alive. We'll solve this, boss, together. When Claire walked away, quickly blending in with the downtown pedestrians, the three sat back on the bench. The sky had cleared, and the afternoon sun now warmed the park. She seems to like you a lot, commented Ty casually. Anthony smiled. Claire is like a younger sister. She started as an intern at the company and grew under my supervision. I trust her completely. And this plan? Do you really think it will work? Going against a big company isn't easy. It won't be easy, agreed Anthony, but I have to try. Not just for me, but for everyone who worked on Project Helios, for all the people who could benefit from this technology. And for the money, added Ty, pragmatic as always. Anthony laughed softly. Yes, Ty, the money matters too. If we lose this battle, I lose years of work, and probably my career. But there are more important things at stake. Like what? Like doing the right thing. Like not letting powerful people simply take what they want at the expense of others. Anthony looked directly at Ty. Like showing a smart kid that the world can be better than he thinks. Ty looked away, uncomfortable with the intensity in Anthony's words. Okay, no need to get all emotional. Mrs. Jenkins smiled, observing the interaction between the two. There was something forming there, a connection that transcended the initial agreement based on interest and reward. Let's go home, she suggested, standing up. We have a lot to plan before Claire returns with news. The way back was quieter, each absorbed in their own thoughts. For Anthony, the hope of recovering his life and his work was beginning to take concrete form. For Mrs. Jenkins, concern about the risks mixed with the satisfaction of doing something significant. And for Ty, something new and undefined was beginning to bloom. A strange feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, there was more to life than just surviving one day at a time. Upon arriving at Mrs. Jenkins' house, they found a man waiting at the door. Tall, with a serious appearance, he wore a well-cut suit that immediately put Anthony and Ty on alert. "Who is he?" whispered Ty, instinctively positioning himself slightly behind Anthony. Mrs. Jenkins narrowed her eyes, observing the visitor. "I've never seen him before." The man noticed their approach and turned. His gaze passed quickly over Mrs. Jenkins and Ty, fixing on Anthony with a disturbing intensity. "Mr. Matthews," he said in a deep voice, "I've finally found you." Anthony's heart accelerated. How had he been discovered so quickly? Was he some envoy of Richard's? But then, the man did something unexpected. He extended his hand in a formal gesture. "Ryan Sullivan, personal security. Your ex-wife hired me to find you." Anthony blinked, confused. "Marissa is looking for me." "Yes, sir. She never believed the nervous breakdown story. Said you could be many things, but never unstable." The man maintained his neutral, professional expression. "I've been working for a week. Followed several false leads until this morning, when Miss Claire Roberts let something slip about a message from you." Anthony tensed. "Claire revealed, not intentionally," assured Ryan. "She's careful. But I have experience in reading people. I followed her to the park, observed the meeting from a distance, and then approached her discreetly. She confirmed you were alive and explained the situation." "And why should we trust you?" asked Ty, his voice carrying a distrust acquired on the streets. Ryan looked at the boy with an expression that mixed surprise and respect. "Valid question. I have identification and can provide Mrs. Marissa's contact for confirmation." Mrs. Jenkins, always practical, interrupted. I think it's better if we continue this conversation inside the house, away from curious eyes. Everyone agreed, and the group entered. While Anthony verified Ryan's credentials and spoke on the phone with his ex-wife to confirm the story, Ty observed the new visitor with attentive eyes. It was evident that the man had training, the way he positioned himself, how he observed the environment, how he maintained a calculated distance. "Marissa confirmed," Anthony finally said, hanging up the phone. "Ryan is legitimate. She really hired him when no one from the company could explain exactly where I was being treated." "Good," replied Ryan, relaxing almost imperceptibly. "Because we have a bigger problem. Miss Claire was followed after leaving the park, not by me, by someone else. Someone professional who knew how to keep their distance, but not enough for me not to notice." Anthony's face turned pale. "Richard found out?" "Possibly. Miss Claire is aware and taking precautions, but I suggest you do too. This place may not be safe for much longer." A heavy silence fell over the room. What had begun as a cautious recovery plan was quickly transforming into something riskier, more urgent. Ty looked at Anthony, whose face showed iron determination despite the apparent danger. "What do we do now?" asked the boy, his voice firmer than might be expected from an 11-year-old. Anthony exchanged a significant look with Ryan before answering. "Now, we accelerate the plan, and we prepare for confrontation. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue." Night fell quickly over the riverside suburb. In Mrs. Jenkins's small living room, the improvised group discussed in low voices. Ryan had insisted they close all curtains and speak only in interior rooms, away from windows. His security experience had brought a new dimension of caution to the plan. "Claire made contact with the journalist," informed Ryan, checking a message on his special cell phone, protected against tracking. "Patricia Norton agreed to meet with you tomorrow morning." "That's good," replied Anthony, who was pacing back and forth in the small room. "But first we need to access the ring data. Without the evidence, we have nothing concrete to show her." "Claire's brother is preparing the necessary equipment," continued Ryan. "We can go there tonight, as soon as he confirms everything is ready." Ty observed the conversation from the corner of the room, sitting on the arm of an old armchair. For the boy, accustomed to solving immediate survival problems, all that planning seemed excessively complicated. "Why don't we go straight to the company?" he asked suddenly, interrupting the technical discussion between Anthony and Ryan. "If you're the real boss, can't you just walk in there and tell everyone to stop?" The adults turned to him, with expressions that varied between amusement and surprise at the simplicity of the suggestion. "It's not that simple, Ty," explained Anthony patiently. "Richard has probably already issued orders to prevent me from entering. Besides, without proof that I was attacked and of their plan to sell the project, it would be my word against theirs, and they have a whole fake medical history to discredit me. So what's the real plan?" Anthony sat down, getting closer to Ty's eye level. "First, we recover the data from the ring. With it, we prove that Project Helios is mainly the fruit of my work and that it was complete before my disappearance. Second, with Patricia's help, we prepare a complete report exposing the sabotage attempt and the suspicious partnership with Global Petrol. Third, we present all this during the signing ceremony, when the press will be present, and Richard can't simply silence me." "It's risky," commented Mrs. Jenkins, who until then had been quiet, preparing coffee for everyone. "Very," agreed Ryan, "but with the element of surprise we can succeed. The important thing is that no one knows we're coming." Ryan's cell phone vibrated again. He checked the message and nodded. "The equipment is ready. Claire's brother is waiting for us." The movement was quick and silent. Ryan had brought his car parked 2 blocks away to avoid attention. Anthony insisted that Ty stay with Mrs. Jenkins, considering the possible danger, but the boy was inflexible. "I found you first," he argued, crossing his arms in childish stubbornness that contrasted with his usual maturity. "I'm going all the way." After a brief discussion, Anthony gave in, recognizing that he owed a lot to the boy. The 4 left discreetly through the back of the house, using a narrow alley that Ty knew well from his wanderings around the neighborhood. Ryan drove carefully, taking alternative routes and constantly checking if they were being followed. Claire's brother's apartment was in Lakeside, a middle-class neighborhood in Chicago. It was a modest place, but impressively equipped with technology. Robert, a man of about 40 with features similar to Claire's, received them with a serious expression. "My sister explained the situation to me," he said, dispensing with formal introductions. "I have everything prepared in the office." The office turned out to be a room transformed into a high-tech workstation with multiple monitors, servers in racks, and a visible security system in cameras discreetly installed in the corners. "I work with cybersecurity for some companies," explained Robert, noticing Ty's impressed look. "This is an isolated environment, with no connection to external networks. We can access the data on your device without risk of interception." Anthony removed the ring from his finger and handed it to Robert, who examined it with professional interest. "MatTech proprietary technology, right? I've heard about it, but never seen one of these in person." "Functional prototype," confirmed Anthony. "Limited capacity but sufficient for the essential project files." Robert placed the ring in a device connected to one of his computers. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, opening specialized programs and entering commands. "I need your password or authentication sequence," he said, looking at Anthony. "It's not exactly a password," replied Anthony, moving closer. "It's a specific command sequence combined with recognition of my fingerprint." In the following minutes, Anthony and Robert worked together to access the encrypted data. Ty watched fascinated, though he understood little of what he saw on the screens. For the boy, accustomed to the limited technology he had access to, it seemed like magic. "We did it," finally announced Robert, when a series of files began to appear on the main screen. "Data intact. I'll transfer it to a secure drive." While Robert worked on transferring the files, Claire arrived at the apartment, looking agitated and tired. "I think I managed to shake off any surveillance," she said after greeting everyone. "But we can't stay here for long. Richard is restless. Today he asked if I had noticed anything unusual in the last few days." "What did you say?" asked Anthony. "That I'm so busy with preparations for the ceremony that I barely have time to notice anything. He seemed to accept it, but he's suspicious." "Is the ceremony still confirmed for the day after tomorrow?" "Yes, at 10 a.m. in the main auditorium. Global Petrol, press, the entire board. A big spectacle to celebrate the company's strategic advancement." Claire couldn't hide the disdain in her voice. "It will be our stage then," concluded Anthony. Robert finished transferring the data and handed a small drive to Anthony. "Everything is here. I also copied it to a secure server as a backup." "Thank you, Robert. This means a lot." "Claire is my sister," the man replied simply. "And I never liked this Richard." The group spent the next hour reviewing the recovered files. Anthony explained the main points to Claire and Ryan, highlighting the evidence that proved his authorship in the development of the special catalyst that made Project Helios revolutionary. Ty, initially interested, soon felt the weight of fatigue. It had been a long and emotionally exhausting day. Without realizing, he fell asleep on the couch in the corner of the office, while the adults continued their technical discussion. It was Mrs. Jenkins who noticed first. With maternal gentleness, she adjusted a pillow under the boy's head and covered him with a light jacket that Robert offered. "He's a special boy," she commented softly to Anthony, who observed the scene with a thoughtful expression. "Yes, he is," agreed Anthony. "Without him, I probably wouldn't be alive. What do you intend to do for him when this is all over?" The question caught Anthony by surprise. Amid the whirlwind of the last few days, between recovering his memory and planning how to regain control of his project, he hadn't completely considered Ty's future. "I promise to reward him," he said after a moment, "and I'll keep that promise." "Money isn't all that boy needs," observed Mrs. Jenkins wisely. "He needs opportunities, a real chance in life." Anthony looked again at the sleeping boy. Something in his chest tightened at the thought of the contrast between Ty's intelligence and determination and the conditions in which he lived. "I'll make sure he has that too. You have my word." The rest of the night was dedicated to finalizing the plan. Claire confirmed the meeting with Patricia Norton for 8 a.m. the next morning at a discreet cafe in the Old Town neighborhood. Ryan established security routes and communication protocols. Robert prepared additional copies of the most crucial data. When everything was settled, it was already past midnight. They decided it would be safer to remain at Robert's apartment until morning. Claire would return home normally to avoid raising suspicions and would meet them at the cafe. Try to rest, advised Robert, showing the guest room where they had improvised extra mattresses. Tomorrow will be a decisive day. Anthony nodded but knew that sleep would be difficult. His mind swarmed with possibilities, risks, alternatives. After everyone had retired, he remained in the living room, looking out the window at the illuminated city. Can't sleep. Ty's voice surprised him. The boy had woken up and approached silently, a skill developed on the streets. A lot on my mind, replied Anthony with a tired smile. Are you scared? The direct question, typical of Ty, made Anthony reflect. Not exactly scared, apprehensive maybe. We're risking a lot. But it's worth it, right? Your project and all. It is, not just for the project itself, but for the principle. People like Richard can't just take what they want, destroy lives and careers and get away with it. Ty nodded, as if he perfectly understood the feeling, despite his young age. It's like that at the landfill too. The strongest always try to take the best territory, the best materials. If you don't defend what's yours, you lose everything. Anthony smiled, once again impressed with the boy's practical wisdom. It's very similar, yes. Just on different scales. They remained silent for a few moments, contemplating the city. What will you do after? Asked Ty finally. When you get your company back and everything. First, ensure that Project Helios is developed as planned. It's too important to be shelved. Anthony paused, looking directly at Ty. And I also intend to keep my promise to you. What promise? To repay your help. To ensure you have a better life. Ty looked away, suddenly uncomfortable. You don't have to. I just did what anyone would do. No, Ty. You did much more, and you deserve much more than life has given you so far. The boy didn't respond, but something in his posture changed. As if, for the first time, he allowed himself to consider the possibility of a different future. Go to sleep, suggested Anthony gently. Tomorrow will be a long day. Ty nodded and returned to the couch where he had been sleeping. Anthony remained a few more minutes at the window, his determination renewed. Now he was fighting not just for his project, for his career, for his reputation. He was also fighting for a promise made to a boy who, against all odds, had shown more humanity than many adults he had known. The next morning came too quickly. The group woke up early, prepared in silence, and, after a quick coffee, divided according to the plan. Claire had already left to maintain her normal routine at the company. Robert would stay at the apartment, monitoring communications and ready to provide technical support if needed. Ryan, Anthony, Mrs. Jenkins and Ty headed to the cafe in Old Town for the meeting with the journalist. Patricia Norton was exactly as Claire had described her, a woman of approximately 40, with dark hair tied in a severe bun, penetrating gaze, and a presence that commanded attention. She was sitting at a table at the back of the cafe, drinking espresso and working on a laptop when they arrived. Mr. Matthews, she greeted with a controlled voice, assessing the group with a professional look. Claire told me a quite extraordinary story about you. And completely true, replied Anthony, sitting across from her. The conversation that followed was intense and detailed. Anthony presented the evidence recovered from the ring, technical specifications of Project Helios, development records digitally signed by him, emails exchanged with the team, all proving his authorship and the completeness of the project before his disappearance. Patricia listened attentively, occasionally asking incisive questions or requesting clarification on technical points. Ty observed in admiration how the woman quickly absorbed complex information, her mind clearly processing implications and connections. This is big, she said finally, after almost 2 hours of presentation and discussion. Not just the attempted murder and corporate fraud, but the environmental and economic implications. Technology like this could really change the energy landscape. Exactly why it can't be buried, emphasized Anthony. I'm in, decided Patricia. But we need to act quickly and with precision. If you show up at the ceremony tomorrow without adequate preparation, Richard can simply have you removed as a disturber. What's your suggestion? I have contacts at the FBI, replied Patricia after a moment of reflection, an agent who has investigated other cases of corporate corruption. With the evidence you have, I can convince him to accompany us tomorrow, not officially, but as an observer. His presence will add legitimacy to your accusations. Anthony agreed, impressed with the journalist's practical approach. And what about the press? Leave that to me. I'll ensure there are journalists from other outlets present, not just those invited by Matek. The more witnesses, the better. The plan was beginning to take concrete form. Patricia was already typing rapidly on her laptop, sending messages to contacts, organizing coverage for the next day. "There's one more thing," said Anthony, hesitant. "Claire mentioned that Richard is suspicious. If he discovers we're planning something, that's why we must act with extreme caution in the next 24 hours, intervened Ryan. "I suggest everyone stay together, in a safe location, until the moment of action." "My apartment has space," offered Patricia, "and it's under a different name for professional security reasons." "Perfect," agreed Anthony. While they finalized the details, Ryan's secure cell phone vibrated. He checked the message, and his expression immediately hardened. "Claire is in trouble," he announced, showing the coded message. "Richard called her for a private meeting. She suspects he discovered something." A palpable tension took over the group. Claire was a fundamental piece in the plan, besides being potentially in danger. "We need to get her out of there," Anthony decided immediately. "We can't simply invade Matek," pondered Ryan. "It would be too risky." "But we can't abandon her," insisted Anthony. It was Ty who offered the solution, once again surprising the adults. "What if she pretends to get sick? Really sick, like needing to go to the hospital urgently?" Everyone looked at the boy, considering the simplicity and effectiveness of the idea. "It might work," agreed Patricia. "A medical emergency would be difficult to question, even for Richard." Ryan was already typing a response for Claire, transmitting the suggestion. Minutes later came the confirmation. She would implement the plan immediately. The next hour was one of apprehension. Patricia took advantage of the time to advance her work on the story, organizing the evidence into a coherent narrative. Ryan maintained constant communication with Robert, monitoring any suspicious activity. Mrs. Jenkins, always practical, made sure everyone ate something, insisting they would need energy for what was to come. Ty remained close to Anthony, watching everything with attentive eyes. For the boy, accustomed to a world where justice was an abstract and distant concept, seeing the truth prevail was an almost surreal experience. Finally, Ryan's cell phone vibrated again. "Claire succeeded. She's leaving the company now, claiming symptoms of appendicitis. A colleague is taking her to the hospital, but she'll divert on the way and come to meet us." The relief was palpable. With Claire on the way and the plan for the next day established, the group headed to Patricia's apartment, a spacious loft in Ravenswood, decorated with a mixture of modern art and shelves full of books. "Make yourselves comfortable," instructed the journalist. "We have work to do and little time." The following hours were dedicated to refining every detail of the plan. Claire arrived, visibly shaken but determined, bringing valuable information about the next day's ceremony, the auditorium layout, security positioning, exact schedule. As night advanced, the tension grew. They were about to confront powerful people, with much to lose. The risk was real and considerable. Around midnight, when they were finally preparing for a brief rest before the big day, Anthony found Ty on the apartment's balcony, looking at the night view of the city. "Nervous about tomorrow?" he asked, joining the boy. "A little," admitted Ty, "but also excited, you know. It's the first time I'm part of something like this, something important." Anthony put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "You are an important part of this, Ty. Never forget that. Without you, none of this would be possible." Ty smiled shyly, a rare and genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face into something closer to the child he really was. "I just hope everything works out," he said softly. "It will," promised Anthony with more confidence than he actually felt. "Tomorrow, we'll get justice." The two remained there for a few more minutes, contemplating the city lights, each thinking about the decisive day that awaited them. An unlikely pair united by fate, the executive and the landfill boy, about to face a battle that could change their lives forever. The morning of the ceremony dawned with a surprisingly clear sky for an October day. In Patricia's apartment, the group was already awake and moving before sunrise. The tension was palpable, manifesting in the concentrated silence with which each prepared for their role. Anthony, dressed in borrowed but appropriate clothes for the occasion, a navy blue suit that belonged to Patricia's brother, reviewed for the last time the documents and data that would support his accusations. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from anticipation. After days of recovery and planning, he would finally confront those who had tried to destroy his life and his work. Ryan checked his communication equipment and discussed final security details with Agent James Wilson, Patricia's contact at the FBI, who had arrived early as arranged. The agent, a tall man with a serious expression and perceptive eyes, had listened to the entire story with professional attention the night before, and, although he couldn't act officially without a formal investigation, had offered his personal support to the operation. Claire, who knew better than anyone the internal workings of MatTech, mapped out with Patricia the exact moment for the intervention. The journalist, in turn, coordinated via messages a small team of trusted reporters strategically positioned to cover the event. Mrs. Jenkins prepared coffee for everyone, her practical way of contributing to the collective effort. While serving, she offered words of encouragement and wisdom acquired in decades of life. Only Ty seemed out of place amid the bustle. Sitting in the corner of the room, he observed everything with attentive eyes. He wore the best clothes they could find for him. A simple white shirt and new jeans, hastily purchased by Patricia the night before. Despite the clean clothes and combed hair, there was something in his posture that continued to reflect the hard life of the landfill, a constant vigilance, a readiness to react to any threat. Anthony approached him, holding 2 cups of coffee. He offered one to Ty, who accepted hesitantly. "Nervous?" he asked, sitting next to the boy. Ty shrugged, trying to seem indifferent. "Not much. I just don't know what I'll do there. You all have a role, but "You are my most important witness," interrupted Anthony seriously. "It was you who found me, who took care of me when I was most vulnerable. Your presence is fundamental to telling this story." "But what if no one believes me? I'm just a kid from the landfill." Anthony smiled gently. "That's exactly why your word carries so much weight. You have nothing to gain by lying. You have no connections to the company, to the business. You're a pure, incorruptible witness." Ty considered the words, a slight blush rising to his face. He had never thought of himself as incorruptible. In fact, he had always prided himself on his pragmatism, on doing what was necessary to survive. But now, seeing himself through Anthony's eyes, he began to see something different in his own actions. "Okay," he finally agreed. "I'll tell everything exactly as it happened." At 9 a.m. the group divided according to the established plan. Patricia went directly to the ceremony, using her press credential. Claire, who was officially still on medical leave, would remain behind the scenes until the right moment. Ryan, Agent Wilson, and Mrs. Jenkins would enter as guests, using special invitations that Claire had obtained through contacts at the company. Anthony and Ty would be the last to arrive, when the ceremony was already underway. The element of surprise was crucial to prevent Richard from blocking their entry or preparing some countermeasure. The MatTech Innovations headquarters occupied a modern glass and steel building in Chicago's financial center. Its bold architecture reflected the image of innovation that the company carefully cultivated. The main auditorium where the signing ceremony would take place was on the ground floor, a spacious area with capacity for 200 people, designed for corporate events and important presentations. When Anthony and Ty arrived, the ceremony had already begun. From a discreet point near the side entrance, they could see the stage where Richard Morgan was speaking with calculated enthusiasm about the historic partnership between MatTech and Global Petrol. Beside him, executives from both companies awaited the formal moment of signing, satisfied smiles on their faces. "He looks so normal," whispered Ty, observing Richard. "Doesn't look like someone who would throw a person in the trash." "The worst predators rarely show their claws until the moment of attack," responded Anthony quietly. "Richard has always been like this, charming, articulate, apparently reasonable. That's what makes him so dangerous." Through the discreet communication system provided by Ryan, they received confirmation that everyone was positioned. Patricia had strategically placed herself near the stage, along with other journalists. Agent Wilson was in the 3rd row next to Ryan. Mrs. Jenkins had sat discreetly at the back, ready to take care of Ty if the situation became excessively tense. Claire waited in the side corridor, ready to enter at the right moment. "And so, with great pride, we announce this partnership that will take MatTech to new global heights," continued Richard, his voice amplified by the auditorium's sound system. "The project we initially called Helios, and which will now be integrated into Global Petrol's Advanced Research Division, represents the future of sustainable energy." Anthony felt his blood boil as he heard his project being presented as a simple asset to be transferred. Years of work, countless hours of research, the dedication of an entire team, reduced to a line in a commercial contract. "It's time," he murmured, receiving confirmation from Ryan through the communicator. With a nod to Ty, Anthony adjusted his tie and walked determinedly toward the main auditorium. The boy followed right behind, trying to imitate the adult's confident posture, though his heart was beating rapidly. The reaction was immediate and electrifying. First, a confused murmur ran through the audience when some employees recognized their former director, supposedly removed for mental health issues. Then, exclamations of surprise when Anthony advanced down the central aisle toward the stage. Richard, in the middle of his sentence, froze upon seeing his former superior and rival walking in his direction. For a brief instant, his pale face and expression of pure shock revealed everything his carefully rehearsed words would never admit. "Good morning, everyone," greeted Anthony with a firm and clear voice, taking advantage of the general moment of stupefaction. "I apologize for the interruption, but I believe this ceremony is based on a fraud, and I cannot allow it to continue." Security guards began to move, but Agent Wilson stood up, discreetly showing his identification. That simple gesture was enough to cause hesitation. No one wanted to create an incident with a federal law enforcement representative present. "Anthony," recovered Richard, forcing an uncomfortable smile. "What a pleasant surprise. We weren't expecting to see you today. How are you feeling?" "Your health?" "My health is excellent, Richard," interrupted Anthony, now at the foot of the stage, looking directly at the man who had tried to destroy him. "Especially considering that a little over 2 weeks ago, I was attacked in the company parking lot and abandoned in a landfill to die." A collective gasp ran through the auditorium. The cameras of the journalists present were now all turned toward Anthony, capturing every word. Patricia, strategically positioned, signaled to her team to ensure everything was recorded. "This is absurd," replied Richard, his smile now completely gone. "You had a nervous breakdown during our last meeting. You're clearly confused, mixing fantasy with reality. Please let us help you." "The only confusion here," countered Anthony, climbing onto the stage despite the protests of the security guards, "is the one you created with your fabricated story. Fortunately, I have proof." Patricia advanced, handing Anthony a tablet where the documents recovered from the ring were organized. At the same time, Claire entered from the side of the stage, positioning herself near her former boss in clear sign of support. "Ladies and gentlemen," continued Anthony, now addressing the audience and the cameras, "Project Helios is not just another initiative from MatTech. It's revolutionary technology that could transform the energy sector, drastically reducing dependence on fossil fuels. And it was precisely because of this that some people tried to prevent it from being developed as planned." With precise gestures, Anthony began to present the evidence, the complete records of the project's development under his leadership, the feasibility studies that proved its disruptive potential, emails exchanged with the team. The evidence was methodically displayed on the screens that would originally show the signing ceremony. Richard, visibly uncomfortable, tried to interrupt. "This is an invasion of private property. These documents belong to the company and—" "They are my intellectual property," corrected Anthony firmly, "developed by me and my team over years, and I'm here to ensure they're used according to the original purpose, to benefit society, not be buried by interests contrary to progress." The Global Petrol executive, a stocky, middle-aged man who until then had been watching the scene with growing discomfort, stood up. "I believe we should suspend this ceremony until these accusations are clarified." "Excellent idea," agreed Agent Wilson, approaching the stage. "As a representative of the FBI, I suggest that no one leave the premises until we clarify a few points." Panic began to spread across Richard's face. His eyes moved quickly between the exits, calculating possibilities of escape. But the circle was closed. Journalists blocked one exit, the agent another, and the astonished audience occupied all the remaining space. It was at this moment that Anthony made a gesture for Ty to approach. The boy, who until then had been watching everything with wide eyes, walked hesitantly to the stage. "This," presented Anthony, placing his hand on Ty's shoulder, "is the young man who saved my life. He found me in the Riverside landfill, took care of me when I was unconscious, and helped me recover my memories and my strength to be here today." A murmur of admiration ran through the audience. "Ty, unaccustomed to being the center of attention, blushed intensely. But when Anthony gave him a small, encouraging nod, the boy took a step forward. "My name is Tyler," he said, his voice initially trembling, but gaining firmness as he spoke. "I work as a scavenger at the landfill since my grandmother got sick. I found Mr. Anthony 2 weeks ago thrown among garbage bags all beat up. He didn't remember who he was at first. Only later did he start remembering bit by bit. The simplicity and honesty in Ty's account had a strength that no elaborate speech could achieve. The cameras focused on the contrast between the sophisticated executive and the boy of humble origin, united by extraordinary circumstances. He talked in his sleep," continued Ty, now fully involved in his account. "Talked about the project, about someone wanting to steal, about a betrayal. When he got better, we discovered it was all true." Richard, seeing his position increasingly untenable, tried one last desperate move. "This is clearly a setup. A street kid, probably paid to tell this absurd story. Who would believe—" "I believe it," interrupted Claire firmly. "As Mr. Matthews' executive assistant for 6 years, I can confirm that he never showed any sign of mental instability. On the contrary, he was always the most balanced among the directors. And I believe it too," added a female voice from the audience. An elegant woman stood up, Marissa, Anthony's ex-wife, who had arrived discreetly during the confusion. "I've known Anthony for 15 years. We have our differences, but I know he would never fabricate a story like this. And more importantly, he would never abandon a project he believes in so deeply." Marissa's presence was the last straw. Richard, realizing he had lost control of the situation, tried to leave discreetly through the backstage, only to find Ryan blocking his way. "I suggest you stay to clarify some questions, Mr. Morgan," said the private security guard with glacial politeness. The following minutes were chaotic. The chairman of MatTech's board, an elderly gentleman who had observed the entire scene with growing disturbance, finally spoke, officially suspending the ceremony and calling an extraordinary meeting immediately. The Global Petrol representatives withdrew quickly, clearly wishing distance from the forming scandal. Journalists surrounded all those involved, eager for statements. In the midst of the confusion, Ty remained by Anthony's side, watching with fascination as events unfolded. For the boy, accustomed to a world where justice was an abstract and distant concept, seeing the truth prevail was an almost surreal experience. "Did it work?" he asked quietly to Anthony, as they were led to a private room to await the meeting with the board. Anthony smiled, the tension of the last few days finally beginning to dissipate. "Not completely yet, but we took the first step, and it was an important step." The following hours were intense. Meetings with the board of directors, detailed testimonies, meticulous analysis of the presented evidence. Agent Wilson, now officially involved, took notes and occasionally asked incisive questions. Patricia coordinated her journalistic team, ensuring that each development was adequately documented. Ty, Mrs. Jenkins, and Claire waited in an anteroom, occasionally receiving updates from Ryan. Fatigue was beginning to weigh on everyone, especially on Ty, who wasn't accustomed to the formal corporate environment, and prolonged tension. It was almost at the end of the afternoon when Anthony finally emerged from the meeting room, accompanied by the board chairman. His face showed signs of exhaustion, but there was also an unmistakable expression of triumph. The board voted for Richard's immediate removal and the nullification of any negotiation with Global Petrol, he announced, a smile growing on his tired face. Project Helios will remain under MatTech's control, with accelerated development for launch within 6 months. A collective sigh of relief ran through the group. Claire was the first to hug Anthony, followed by Mrs. Jenkins. Ryan and Agent Wilson exchanged a formal but genuinely satisfied handshake. Ty, however, remained slightly apart, uncertain about his place in that celebration. Anthony noticed and approached him. "We couldn't have done it without you," he said, kneeling down to be at the boy's eye level. "What will happen to that guy?" "Richard?" "He'll face the legal consequences of his actions," replied Anthony seriously. "Agent Wilson has already initiated the procedures for a formal investigation." Ty nodded, satisfied with the response. Justice, after all, wasn't as abstract a concept as he had thought. "And now? You go back to being the boss and everything goes back to normal?" "Yes and no," smiled Anthony. "I return to directing the research department." "Yes. But nothing will be exactly like before. Some things have changed permanently." He paused significantly. including me. Before Ty could respond, the board chairman approached, extending his hand to the boy with surprising formality. Young Tyler, Matek owes you a debt of gratitude. Without your intervention, we would have lost not only a valuable executive, but technology that can change the future of the country. Ty, awkward but proud, shook the offered hand. I just did what needed to be done, sir. And it's precisely that kind of integrity we admire, replied the elderly man with a smile. Turning to Anthony, he added, The board unanimously approved your proposal, by the way. Consider it official. Anthony thanked him with a nod, while the chairman moved away to attend to other urgent matters. What proposal? Asked Ty, curious. One I made with you in mind, replied Anthony. Matek is creating a scholarship program for young talents from underprivileged communities, complete education, from elementary school to university, with guidance and mentoring. And you will be the first beneficiary, if you accept. Ty's eyes widened in shock. Me? Study? But the landfill. How will I live? That's another point. I spoke with Mrs. Jenkins and she agreed to be your legal guardian, if you want. Matek will provide financial support for both of you, ensuring that you can dedicate yourself exclusively to your studies. The boy remained silent, processing the enormity of what was being offered, a life completely different from what he had known until then, an opportunity he had never dreamed possible. You don't have to decide now, added Anthony gently, seeing the confusion on the boy's face. Think carefully. The offer stands, regardless of when you want to accept it. Ty nodded, still stunned. He looked at Mrs. Jenkins, who was watching him with a warm and encouraging smile. The idea of having a real home, with someone who really cared, was almost as impactful as the prospect of studies. And there's one more thing, continued Anthony, taking something from his pocket. This is yours by right. It was a check. Ty took the paper with trembling hands, his eyes almost popping out when he saw the written amount. $50,000? He exclaimed, incredulous. Your reward for saving my life, explained Anthony simply. I promised I would pay, and a man should always keep his promises. The group left the Matek headquarters at nightfall, exhausted but deeply satisfied. The story was already spreading through the news. The executive given as mentally unstable, who had reappeared to prevent the fraudulent sale of revolutionary technology, saved by a young landfill scavenger. Patricia had ensured that the narrative was accurate and fair, highlighting both the human drama and the technological and environmental implications. As they headed to Ryan's car, Ty walked beside Anthony, still trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. His life had completely changed in the space of 2 weeks, from anonymous landfill kid to central piece in a story of redemption and justice. What are you thinking about? Asked Anthony, noticing the boy's thoughtful silence. Ty considered the question for a moment before answering. I was thinking that sometimes we find valuable things in the trash, but I never thought I'd find something that would change my entire life. Anthony smiled, touched by the simple wisdom of those words. And I never imagined I would need to be discarded as trash to find what really matters. Under the rapidly darkening sky, the two walked side by side, the executive and the landfill boy, united by extraordinary circumstances, but also by something deeper and more lasting, the mutual understanding that sometimes the most unlikely encounters can lead to the most significant transformations. 3 months later, the Matek headquarters was decorated for a special occasion. In the main auditorium, the same where the dramatic confrontation had occurred, a different audience gathered for an important announcement. Anthony, back in the position of Director of Research and Development, officially presented the Helios program for education and social inclusion, a broad initiative that combined the development of biofuel technology with an educational project for young people from underprivileged communities. In the center of the first row, Ty observed everything with a mixture of pride and admiration. Wearing the uniform of the private school where he had started his studies just a month ago, he seemed like a different person, not just because of the clothes or the new haircut, but because of his posture, the sparkle in his eyes, the growing confidence. Next to him, Mrs. Jenkins, now his official legal guardian, smiled with the quiet pride of someone seeing a promise being fulfilled. Claire, Ryan, Patricia, and even Agent Wilson had attended for the occasion, forming an unlikely extended family around the boy who, unknowingly, had catalyzed a transformation much larger than his own. When Anthony finished his presentation, he invited Ty to the stage. The boy climbed with firm steps without the nervousness that had dominated him months before. Before the microphone, he looked at the audience full of unfamiliar faces, but also at those he now knew well, people who had entered his life in an unexpected way and had changed it forever. "My name is Tyler," he began, his clear and confident voice filling the auditorium. "A few months ago, I was just a scavenger at the Riverside landfill. Today, I'm here to tell how I found not only a man among the waste, but also a future I never imagined possible." As Ty narrated his story, now no longer as an improvised defense account, but as a conscious testimony of transformation, Anthony watched with a mixture of pride and humility. Of all the creations in his career, of all the innovations and patents, none compared to what he saw now. The flourishing of a potential that could have been lost, the restored dignity of a life that society had marginally discarded. Project Helios continued advancing in its development, promising to revolutionize the energy sector in the coming years. But its true revolution had already begun, not just in Mattek's laboratories, but in the life of a boy who had discovered among debris and rejects that the most precious value is one that cannot be measured, only shared. And so on that sunny January afternoon, as Ty concluded his speech under warm applause, two journeys that had begun in such unlikely circumstances converged into a new beginning, a story of redemption, recognition, and infinite possibilities, living proof that sometimes we need to lose everything to find what really matters,